demonization of Ukraine began by Tucker Carlson, who, in my opinion, ended up where he should have been all along, which is interviewing Vladimir Putin.
He's the worst. It's just awful. That Ukrainian funding was approved in the Senate last night, by the way, and in typical congressional Senate fashion, the bill was a giant mass of things. You know, we've been waiting since day one for there to be literally just no matter what you believe about the Ukraine funding, can we agree on one thing? Because listen, I have mixed emotions about it. I'm not 100% against the Ukraine funding. I do think we need to, articulate a strategy, define what victory is, have an audit to make sure that the money's being spent right, But so in this day and age, if you say something like that, suddenly you're a puppet of Vladimir Putin. But say what you will, no matter where you stand on Ukraine funding, and I truly do mean this is often a rhetorical device people use. I don't care what you believe about this, but we can agree on that. But this is true, 100%. This isn't hyperbole. No matter what you think of Ukraine funding, we should all be able to agree that it should be a standalone, clean, vote yes, vote no bill, not lumped in with hurricane relief like they've done in the past, or Maui fire relief, or some other little thing that they put on that everybody wants to. No. We're going to have a clean up or down vote on one thing and one thing only. Do we continue funding Ukraine with no strings attached and no questions asked? Because that's what we've been doing. Upwards to, 200 billion at this point? But they still refuse to do it. Last night in the Senate, it was Ukraine funding. It was money for Israel to replenish the Iron Dome because Iran just bombed the F out of them. It was money to help Taiwan protect itself. It was humanitarian aid for Hamas, and we all know what that means. And they even threw TikTok in there. Oh, we're going to get rid of the Chinese ownership of TikTok, and we're going to force them to sell because we don't want TikTok to be owned by the red Chinese here in this country. They even threw that in there. All of that lumped in with one bill. So even if you're opposed to one thing, but I don't like TikTok, so I want to vote on the TikTok thing, but I'm not so sure about the Hamas humanitarian funding. Nope, take it or leave it, all or nothing. Typical. Well, Mitch McConnell, the minority leader for the Republicans, was asked after the vote, why did it take so long to bring in enough Republicans on this thing? What is the problem with Republican support on the Ukraine funding? And you'll never guess who he blamed.
That time period for Ukraine.
Well, that's a good question. You already know the answer. I think the demonization of Ukraine began by Tucker Carlson, who, in my opinion, ended up where he should have been all along, which is interviewing Vladimir Putin. And so he had an enormous audience, which convinced a lot of rank and file Republicans that maybe this was a mistake. I think the former president had sort of mixed views on it. We all felt the border was a complete disaster, myself included. And Chad, you remember covering the phases we went through. First, there was an effort to make law, which requires you to deal with Democrats. And then a number of our members thought it wasn't good enough. And then our nominee for president didn't seem to want us to do anything at all. That took months to work our way through it. So we ended up doing the supplemental that was originally proposed, which dealt with not all problems. It didn't solve the border problem, but certainly addressed the growing threats at the moment.
All right, there's a lot in here to unpack, and we're going to spend a little time unpacking it. But let's start with this Tucker Carlson thing. It all started with Tucker Carlson, who ended up where he should have been. We're in Moscow. Leave the country. Go to Moscow if you like it so much. He's the worst. It's just awful. And beneath his position as the senator and certainly as the leader of the Republicans. But it's also despicable because he's buying into this myth. Think about what he's saying here. This is a man who has power, Mitch McConnell, a lot of power. He's one of 100 senators, but he's one of 49 Republicans, and he's the leader of them. He controls a whole lot in this government right now. And as a leader, your job is to persuade those who you lead and persuade we, the people who have empowered you to be in the government, is to persuade us and convince us that you're doing the right thing. And that you've got the right idea and you're going to lead us in the right direction, right? That's what a leader does. A leader doesn't just go where the masses tell them to go. Hey, we all want you to go this way, so you go there and we'll follow you. No, sometimes a leader actually has to persuade and make the case and say, listen, not all of you might think this is the right idea, but you put me in this place to be a leader. Let me explain to you why this is the right thing to do. And now I'm going to lead us in that direction. That's what a leader does. Okay. And he's the one with power, not Tucker Carlson. And what he's conceding here is a couple of things that are really eye-opening that you need to take into account. Number one, he's saying that despite all of his power, Mitch McConnell wants to go on television. He picks up the phone. He's there no matter where. He wants to be. Of course, Leader McConnell, come on in. We'd love to have you on the show. Right? And he's saying that he cannot persuade the rank and file of Republicans about this issue as effectively as a primetime TV host. He is conceding the fact that he is incapable of making a good case for this compared to Tucker Carlson. Number one. Number two, he's buying into this myth that Republicans in this country, conservatives in this country, American citizens in this country are just robots, zombies. We just do whatever the person on Fox News tells us. We don't know what to think about anything, but if Tucker Carlson tells us this is how we're supposed to think about it, well, then this is how we're going to think about it, right? That's the caricature that the left and liberals say about Fox News and us, viewers of conservative media. Oh, they're all brain dead zombies, and they'll just go wherever Tucker Carlson or Bill O'Reilly or Greg Gutfeld or Sean Hannity or Larry O'Connor will tell them to go. It's so disrespectful. It's disrespectful to you because he thinks you wouldn't have reached that conclusion about Ukraine funding if it weren't for that mean old Tucker Carlson telling you what you should think. It's also disrespectful to conservative media that in some way that's our job, that's our role, that what we do is tell you what you're supposed to think. When in fact, what we do is reflect the ideas and values and principles that we all share. Everything about what he said about Tucker is absolutely odious and offensive and disgusting and reveals him to be a very weak, sad, bitter man. Which is kind of pathetic considering the fact that he's been a senator for 30 years since the Reagan administration? You'd think that in this coda of your career, the final months of your career, you could hang your hat on something other than just whining and bitching about Tucker Carlson? Really? Mitch, that's what you've reduced yourself to? Yes, that's what he's reduced himself to. Now, there's some other things that he said there about the border and Trump that I want to get to in a minute. But let's just reflect really quickly. Since he brought up Tucker Carlson, let's go to Tucker Carlson. This is circa 2022, back when he was on Fox News Channel. This is the day that China came out and called for a ceasefire in Russia, Ukraine. This is only months after the invasion. This is what Mitch McConnell claims is such an odious, objectionable, pro-Putin, pro-Russian, outlandish position that Tucker Carlson took that all of us brain-dead zombie lemmings followed along with. Watch. You judge.
We call on all parties to achieve a ceasefire, like the one they nearly had in April before the Biden administration blew it up because they want regime change in Russia. Now, that's coming from China, which has a human rights record that makes Russia seem like Sweden. And of course, China's benefited almost as much from this war as Putin has and Raytheon and Lockheed has. But even the Chinese are not crazy enough to want nuclear Armageddon. In the end, all they want to do is do business and dominate through business. They don't want their customers to blow themselves up, and they understand they're coming incredibly close. Only Tony Blinken and lunatics like Tory Newland really want that. And they are fully behind Ukraine's president as he declares that his goal is not ending the war and getting his country back, which is a fine and admirable goal that most Americans support. No, his goal is toppling Vladimir Putin and turning Russia into another failed state. Oh, good plan. Here he is.
A crime has been committed against Ukraine, and we demand just punishment. The crime was committed against our state borders. The crime was committed against the values that make you and me a community of the United Nations. And Ukraine demands punishment for trying to steal our territory. This is the first item of our peace formula. Comprehensive item. Punishment.
So a corrupt Eastern European authoritarian leader in a T-shirt is lecturing us about the community of nations and telling us this is really about the punishment the Ukraine demands. It's not about self-defense or getting their territory back. It's about regime change. Specifically, they're demanding a nuclear strike from us. How do we get involved in this anyway? But almost nobody in Washington is standing back to ask that question. They're full speed ahead on this. This is insane, but they're all for it. Adam Kinzinger just tweeted this, quote, "By the way, any target within Russia that contributes to the war is fair game by law of armed conflict. There's no escalation possible by a country fighting for survival. Anyone claiming Ukraine is escalating should stop." Okay. Anyone saying things that stupid in public should immediately resign from public office and be silent until wisdom comes, please. Then over in the Senate, Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal are in agreement on just that same point. They've announced that Russia is a state sponsor of terrorism. Okay.
Russia should be declared a state sponsor of terrorism because the events of these past days and weeks have shown the need more powerfully than ever that Russia should be designated a state sponsor of terrorism.
I think bipartisanship is strong when it comes to supporting Ukraine over Russia. I want to thank the administration for doing more. We have our differences about the next step, but Speaker Pelosi's in our camp. She has said, from her point of view, Russia has earned the designation in U.S. law of being a state sponsor of terrorism.
The fact that Lindsey Graham can go on television, as he so often does, and claim to be conservative and someone who cares about the United States, it's beyond.
All right. So that's a little taste of what Tucker Carlson was saying in 2022, when, again, the main argument he was making was even China is calling for a ceasefire here. What's wrong with a ceasefire? It's a stalemate. And again, that was over a year ago, a year and a half ago. And the same people who are demanding a ceasefire from Israel for defending themselves from a violent, despicable, bloody terrorist attack, that they're demanding a ceasefire and the ability for Hamas to rearm. If you dare say that maybe there's a ceasefire after over 2 years of a stalemate over in Russia, Ukraine, well, you're a traitor. You're a traitor and you're a puppet for Putin. And what was that last thing? Russia should be designated a state sponsor of terror. Interesting. You know, that bill that they just passed that they're all celebrating, it funds Ukraine with military assistance. We're up to $200 billion now, I believe. It also gives money to Taiwan to help protect themselves from China. It gives money to Israel to help replenish Iron Dome and more defensive capabilities there. And the TikTok thing. What was that other thing? Oh, yeah. We're giving aid to Hamas. We're giving aid to Hamas. We're calling it humanitarian aid, but we know what they've been doing with the humanitarian aid that we've been giving them since the Obama administration. It only stopped during Trump because he saw what they were doing with their humanitarian aid. So we're giving money to Hamas. You know what? Let's go to the State Department website and take a look at the designated foreign terrorist organizations. We just heard Lindsey Graham saying that Russia should be a designated terror organization, right? Russia. So this is the U.S. State Department, foreign terrorist organizations, and here's the list of designated terror organizations. And So, wow, it's a long list. These are a lot. They all seem to have Arabic names. Terrorist organizations. Since it's such a long list, let's just do a quick search, right? So we do our little Control F. Let's do HAMA. There they are. Look, it's Hamas. Hamas, designated in October of 1997. For 17 years, the official position of the United States government through the State Department on our list of designated terror organizations, Hamas has been there. And yet we're celebrating and waving flags about allocating U.S. tax dollars yesterday in this bill to fund them, to give them more money. How these people stand on their high horse and lecture all of us about international affairs and how things really ought to be done is beyond me. The hypocrisy, the doublespeak, the lies. It's, if I may use the word, deplorable. Which brings us back to Mitch McConnell. He was asked, and he blamed Tucker Carlson for Republicans not supporting billion after billions of dollars to Ukraine without any sort of end game, any strategy, any definition of victory, any strings attached, any audit, any assurance that the money isn't going to corrupt entities or organizations. Even the Heritage Foundation is saying that this needs to stop. And I don't think Tucker Carlson controls things at the Heritage Foundation. But then Mitch McConnell said this about being sidetracked on the border bill.
I think the former president had sort of mixed views on it. We all felt that border was a complete disaster, myself included. And Chad, you remember covering the phases we went through. First, there was an effort to make law, which requires you to deal with Democrats. And then a number of our members thought it wasn't good enough. And then our nominee for president didn't seem to want us to do anything at all. That took months.
His name is Donald Trump. It's very cutesy, this whole our nominee for president, the former. Just say his name. What is wrong with you? I'm not going to say his name. Who are you, Jonah Goldberg? Our nominee for president didn't seem to want us to do anything. Is that true? Or maybe he didn't want you to do something horrible, which is what that bill was. See, Mitch McConnell is the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, at least for another 6-7 months. And he couldn't even get a majority of his own caucus to support that. He didn't even bring it up for a vote. And he's blaming Donald Trump, which I guess concedes that he's not a very good leader. And maybe his resignation should be effective now, not in November. That's all very cutesy, too. I'll stay on until the presidential election, then I'll step down. Maybe President Trump and the Republicans who didn't support that bill didn't say we didn't want you to do anything. We just don't want you to do this terrible thing that gives more power, more money to Joe Biden and allows him to allow legally over 5,000 people a day crossing the border. And he can even waive that. I mean, we don't want to relitigate that bill right now. We know it was awful. We know it was a disaster. To blame the delay on Ukraine funding on your little escapade trying to work with Democrats to secure the border. I mean, maybe it was doomed at the beginning when Democrats said, sure, we want to secure the border. Come sit with us and talk. Because you know they're lying. Because they can fix the border problem right now. They don't need you, Mitch. But one other thing about the border, since he raised it, in this answer about Ukraine funding and why Republicans weren't fully on board, Mitch McConnell raised the issue of the border. So let me show you a page from the bill that he just voted on. It has to do with international security assistance, international narcotics control and law enforcement. This is a clause within the Ukraine funding bill that passed the House with Democrats waving flags and Mitch McConnell celebrating last night when it passed in the Senate. And let me read it to you. For an additional amount of international narcotics control and law enforcement, $300 million to remain available until September 2025 for assistance for Ukraine and countries impacted by the situation in Ukraine, provided that such funds may be made available to support the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine and National Police of Ukraine, including units supporting and under the command of the armed forces. Do you know what that means? $300 million, that's easy to understand. September 2025, they get that $300 million for the next year and a half. Where's the money going to? Funds available to support the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine and National Police of Ukraine. That's their border control. That's their border patrol. That's their CBP. That's their border. That's their Mexico. That's their Rio Grande. That's their El Paso. We just gave $300 million to Ukraine so they can enforce their border. I think you have every reason to be pissed off about this. And no, Senator McConnell, I didn't need to hear that from Tucker Carlson.